to Talking Absolute Worship. It's Proper 29, the first Sunday of Advent. And Neil, where are you going this week?
I think one of the things I'm struck by is there's kind of that sense of here we go again. So what does it mean to dig into stuff that we've maybe dug into quite often, and to find some way for that to speak? I think one of the things that's striking me just as I look at the readings, and one of the challenges I think that's actually there in the texts, is holding together a sense of expectancy and the promise that there are good things ahead, the sense that Advent is beginning, and we're looking ahead with Isaiah and others to the excitement of God's promise. But there's also then, in tension with that, there's God's judgment. And there's that balancing act of judgment. And I think I was particularly struck with the Isaiah reading, of that sense of God's absence is actually part of the problem. The reason the people have struggled to be faithful is, well, where is God anyway? And the other thing that's really striking me from some of the things that I've been reflecting on is that this is a really significant Advent. Maybe, it's almost like a Advent in wartime. One of the commentaries I looked at said one of the difficulties of some of these texts is how do we find something that is a shared experience on the scale of the sort of scale that, say, the exile was for the people of Israel. Well, here we are, and so that gives something, I guess, as something to shape where I might go.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, because I often reading these Isaiah passages, I kind of think to myself, the people hearing this first, their reaction is, yes, that's us he's talking to. That those promises is for us. We're the ones being set free. We're the ones who are being led out of slavery and given freedom. And yet, when we listen to them, we're thinking, oh, now I need to list the groups of people who this applies to, and we're assuming it's not me. And maybe you've got something that, that phrase going around the internet, isn't there, with COVID? We're all in the same storm, but not necessarily in the same boat.
I was also struck, like Neil, with the bit in Isaiah about, it's your fault, God. You hid yourself, so we've made a terrible mess. So it's almost like, okay, it's your fault that we're in this mess, so it's your responsibility to come and sort us out and get us out of it. So in some ways it's very sort of hands off, perhaps. But I hadn't really noticed that in reading it before.
Yeah, there's that verse, isn't it? Verse 5, no, where is it now? Yeah, verse 5, because you hid yourself, we transgressed. It's like I was struck by, I know there's quite a lot of parenting metaphors through the Bible, aren't there? God and parenting, and we being God's children. And it's almost like I felt like this was like the darker side of parenting. I always think, at the beginning of this one, it's like parents at the top of the stairs saying, "Don't make me come down there." Which ones of us have not shouted that down the stairs? Don't make me come down there. But they're saying, "Come down," and it's almost like I was kind of like struck by the parallels with this, with an interview I heard on the radio with somebody who had been neglected as a child. And she said, I wanted attention from my parents. I wanted my parents to notice me. And because they didn't, I got more and more extreme in my behavior. And I didn't care if the way they noticed me was to come downstairs and thrash me or hit me or shout at me, because that was the attention I craved. And I thought, blimey, is that what is that what this is about? They're kind of saying God's a kind of a neglectful parent who's abandoned them, and so they've gone off the rails. It's God's fault, and they want any attention, even if it's going to, God coming down is going to quake the mountains and scare their pants off. They don't mind. They just want to see that God is there, because they're petrified about this absence of God that Neil was talking about. God's absence is like, where is God in all this? It's not a new question, is it?
What's interesting is, I think Isaiah 64 is post-exilic Isaiah, isn't it? It's when they're back. So actually, he has been doing a lot of stuff, because they, first of all, Isaiah is saying, if you're not careful, you're going to exile. And then in exile, they're going, oh God, where are you? You're not with us. And God says, I'm going to take you home, so which we'll have later in Advent. So God takes them back home, and they're still going, yeah, but where are you, God? And they're not. It's like that story of the man waiting for God to save him, and God sends a helicopter or a boat or whatever, and then he drowns. He says, no, you were supposed to come. And it's this same kind of thing, that God is there. They just are refusing to see where he is, or using it as an excuse to carry on misbehaving. So it did remind me of a certain member of our family who, as a toddler, would say the naughty invisible girl did it, which did kind of give away which child it might be that did that. But it's that sense of that it's your fault. And it also sounds a bit like the Garden of Eden, doesn't it? Because you hid yourself, we did these things. You didn't really explain, God, what we should be doing, so it's your fault. Actually, that does sound like children and parents as well, doesn't it? It's your fault.
I was, like you, Neil, I was struck by this Isaiah reading and where we are. I tend to look through Advent for kind of words, themes, to carry through Advent. So it's different for me now because I tend to be in different places. But when I was in one place, I tend to have something that kind of built up through Advent. And I read these and I thought, well, in a way, the word is hope. But I actually wrote down, how bad does life have to be for this to be what you're waiting and hoping for? And then I thought, this bad, as bad as us, not as bad as them. And again, it took me very much to now and COVID and all of that. So what is our hope? And what does it mean to be hopeful people in a time when things are, and I've got to be careful because I know we're on the internet, a bit rubbish.
Yeah.
The internet wouldn't tolerate such language, Ruth. Rachel, where were you going with this week?
Well, I find that churches are very eager to get onto Christmas as soon as Advent begins. So almost Advent begins in sort of high spirits and with, huge amounts of jollity, because, we're in Advent, so that means it's nearly Christmas. And it's quite hard to sort of, dial that back, perhaps in some ways. And like Ruth, I was looking for a sort of progression or, some way that you can kind of build on Advent week by week. And I felt that this Sunday of Advent is, although there is hope, there's also quite a lot of despair about it. And we start in quite a dark place, and we sort of progress and we get, into more hopeful, less despairing stuff as Advent goes on. And like Ruth, that whole idea of waiting, but actually what we're waiting for is something really quite frightening and terrifying and awful. But that's better than this kind of, I don't know, this limbo where we don't know where God is, and we don't know what God is doing, and is there going to be an end to it, and all of those kind of questions. The one thought that really struck me from Isaiah was based on something that I read in a book that I will hold up, called A Star-Filled Grace by Rachel Mann, which has been my kind of go-to Advent Christmas book for the last few years, and she wrote a piece in there about Isaiah 64, oh that you would tear open the heavens and come down. And she talked about this kind of superhero God that we're all wanting. We want this, you know, we want Iron Man to come in and fix everything. We want, you know, we want God to do all the work. And the way that she leads it on actually is that God doesn't give us a superhero, God gives us a baby. And the idea that a superhero wouldn't need us, a superhero would kind of just come and fix it. But actually we're given a baby and we've got to look after a baby, and a baby draws all kinds of emotional responses from you, and makes you actually kind of engage in the process. So although it's perhaps a bit early to start thinking about the baby, I do like the idea of that God giving us not what we want, but what we need. So I think I would probably be focusing on Isaiah, but with a little bit of the Mark coming in, that idea of just kind of being alert and trying to take notice of what's going on around. Perhaps in pre-COVID situations, I've not been as noticeable as I have been more now, but almost every day I'm kind of saying, you know, what is God trying to tell me through this? What is God trying to tell the church through the fact that we've not met for worship in the traditional sense for 6 months? There must be a message in this. And I'm kind of every day saying, you know, what is this message? So sorry, I've gone astray from Advent, but I feel that it's a lot more, you know, active waiting and trying to not just sit back and wait for God to appear, but to really seek God and what God is asking of us.
Mm-hmm. But there's a thing. My mum had particular lymphoma, and the treatment was watchful waiting. And that's what it was called, which was just, you know, kind of keep an eye on how she was feeling, keep an eye on any symptoms. They didn't want to open her up. She was already well into her 80s by then, and it was watchful waiting. And that actually feels like that's the sort of waiting of Advent. So it isn't just a hum, let's eat the chocolates in the Advent calendar, but it is that looking out for, and what is God doing, and where is God now? And it's not enough to say, okay, God, we're waiting. Where are you? But you know, there are already emerging signs. Thank you. That's helpful.
So it's not the all in white shall wait around of the Christmas carol that we will soon not be singing. I kind of like that. A lot of Advent imagery about waiting. I find myself going back to the teenager waiting for the postman to come with the exam results or something, or depending on if you're waiting for something nice or horrible. I'm not really sure what we're waiting for. I think that's a really interesting question that you raised there, Rachel. What are we? Is it something nice or nasty? The countdown that people will be holding around us is a countdown to something nice. It's a countdown to Christmas Day and opening your presents and stuffing your face with turkey, isn't it? That they're not thinking, oh, we're waiting for something scary or frightening or something that will shake the mountains. We're waiting for Christmas Day. That's what Advent is about, countdown to Christmas Day. And we kind of have a counter-cultural message, although we're not really, I don't think, very good at saying, well, what is it we're waiting for? Then so, well, we don't really know. It's a long way off, but we need to be alert and awake. And that's why I was hoping somebody would mention Mark and the fig tree and the leaves coming.
But then maybe this year, more than ever, people will be ready to hear a message that says it's not just waiting for our turkey-filled, chocolate-filled, joy-filled Christmas, because already it feels like everywhere I go, people are saying, oh, you know, and if there's the rule of 6, how are we going to do Christmas? Mm-hmm. And I think I hear churches saying that too. If we can't sing, can't have a carol service, how are we going to do Christmas? And maybe it does give us the opportunity to say, well, first of all, let's do Advent better or more fully or more watchfully and waitfully. and you know, and then see what Christmas looks like, instead of we kind of know what Christmas is meant to feel like and be like.
Mm. Yeah, while you're talking, carry on. Where were you thinking of going with this, Ruth?
Well, people have had enough of me already. I mean, I looked at Isaiah and I looked at Mark. The 1 Corinthians is interesting because that's got a focus on grace, and how, you know, we're made blameless by the grace of God. So that, I thought, had a nice counterpoint of, here is God doing something, because it did feel a bit in the others like, you know, apart from keeping awake and watching, what are we actually meant to do to bring this kingdom about? So 1 Corinthians seems to have something about, so alongside our watchful waiting, there's also an openness to be part of whatever it is that's happening. So we're not just observing from a distance, but we're kind of in it, and part of it, and what changes might not just be the mountains and everything around us, but actually something in us as well. And that's the grace of God doing that. And because I was still a bit fixated on hope, I reminded myself that some psychologists say that in order to have hope, you need 2 things. I wrote it down to make sure I don't get it wrong: agency and pathways, which is just posh psychology speak for the power to do something and the choices to decide what you do. So hope is about having power and having choices. And if you just take the Isaiah and Mark, it feels a bit like we haven't got any power and we haven't got any choices. God's the one with all the power, and God's the one, and we just try and tip God towards the choice that we fancy. So I think you need a little sprinkle of 1 Corinthians in there to say that we do have agency and we do have choices, so we can have hope, because God isn't just coming, which takes us back to Rachel's baby. There is a role for us. No, I don't mean Rachel's baby. The idea of the baby, that there is a role for us in nurturing and in growing and in caring for and in receiving the grace of God, and therefore the signs of the kingdom of God. That made me a bit more hopeful than I was up until then. Reading Isaiah and Mark together, I got a bit gloomy.
It's no bad thing to be hung up on hope, Ruth. Don't apologise for being hung up on hope. I'm glad you brought in Corinthians, because I love the opening there, and the idea that Paul can write to this church and say, every day I thank God for you. I know you as a moderator obviously have this experience every day where you thank God for everything that the church is bringing you in your work as moderator. But it's not always the case, is it, that people in our communities and people in the world thank God for the church? Wouldn't it be ace if people were able to echo Paul's words? Oh, one thing through this COVID thing is I thank God for the church and the grace that they have demonstrated through this whole thing. That would be ace, wouldn't it? Maybe an Advent challenge for everyone to make their local neighbourhoods thank God for their presence, like Paul did. Yeah, Rachel.
I like the idea in Corinthians that in this waiting time we're sort of in an in-between time, and that God's gifts are enough for us. And it is, I think there's something about kind of, we could almost start unwrapping the gift of Christmas now, can't we? Unwrapping, discovering what gifts the Holy Spirit has given us, and actually beginning to practice them and exercise them a bit more perhaps than we generally do. The idea that that's enough for us, and that's quite a good way to spend your waiting time, you know, building up your spiritual muscles and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful thought. There's an interesting thing that's striking me about, I can't remember where I heard it. I've kind of lost track of how many things I've heard analyzing where we all are right now. But it was one of the many things that said there's a really interesting thing happens when you're 6 months into a crisis. You know, that in a sense, we've done a huge amount, churches have done a huge amount, nations have done a huge amount, we've reconfigured all sorts of things. And there was something kind of brutal about being reminded, actually, this isn't the end. This is possibly not even the beginning of the end. You know, it's the end of the beginning or whatever. But actually, the new regulations that we're putting in place will last for 6 months. And sure, you know, who knows what this Christmas is going to be like, but actually, who knows what the Christmas after this is going to be like. You know, that is wearing us down. You know, that's exhausting. I'm struck just listening to the news. You know, it is impossible to turn on the news and not be told about coronavirus. And there is a point at which I find in myself, I'm exhausted just by that. And a couple of things, I think the Corinthians that talks about grace as something dynamic, you know, that actually there are gifts that you have that can sustain you even in tough times. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is also the letter in which Paul is about to hit them round the head and say, you know, I do pray for you every day, but actually some of the stuff that you do really makes me angry. And you're a really bad church. But he's holding on to some of that. And then I went back to the Isaiah, and twice in the Isaiah, we're reminded that God will do the unpredictable thing. It will be unexpected. You know, when God acts, it will be unexpected. And I wonder if that might be another theme that would be interesting for Advent. You know, not least with, as you've all said, there's a danger that Advent is kind of like we jump onto the escalator that ends at Christmas, you know, and we want, it's a bit like with Lent. We jump on the escalator and we want to get to the empty tomb in the garden. But actually, maybe this Advent, above all Advents, we have to wait and wonder, what is God doing? What is God up to? And how do we sustain ourselves with grace and gifts, even when we don't know the answers to a lot of those questions? And when we're surrounded by communities that have kind of moved heaven and earth and are now having to think, actually, everything we've done isn't yet enough. You know, we've got to do it all over again now. And if we're in a, you know, I'm here in Bristol, the students are coming back right now, and you can almost feel the tension of people just thinking, well, I live next to this enormous hall of residence. What does that mean?
I think you're right. There's a temptation at the beginning of Advent to say that we do already know the answers. And we say, yes, this is a time of waiting and we need to wait, but the answer is Jesus. And the answer is going to be a baby, so you don't worry about it. And then nobody ends up waiting because we've already been told what the answer is going to be. Isaiah doesn't really spell it out that much, does he? And it's quite a difficult preach, so isn't it? Wait, guys, I have no idea where this is going, but I think that is part of what Advent is. It's what do we do while we wait, and you know, exercising those gifts of grace, as Rachel was saying, as I think as Neil's is echoing, it's got to be, you know, at least part of what we preach for the beginning of Advent. Lithan, where are you going with this week?
In a rambly sort of way. So there's kind of two different sentences that really strike me this week, and one is the Iona Community song version of Isaiah 64 starts, "Why don't you tear apart the heavens and come down?" And the song's actually quite sad, but it always feels like it should be more angry, you know, going, why don't you do something? And of course, he has. So, but you don't get the resolution in the Isaiah. It's a rant. And perhaps to have hope, we also need to acknowledge how we're feeling, that we are feeling powerless, we're feeling abandoned. We might have done things wrong, but we haven't got any answers at the moment. And it is kind of saying, why don't you come and do something? And then sort of remembering, but he has. So for us as Christians, we'd say God did actually tear apart the heavens and come down, but he didn't, as Rachel said, he doesn't do it in a right on the naughty step you go kind of way. He does it in that way that is about love, that comes as a baby, that becomes the man that points us back to God without a sword. And the readings for the Sunday of Hope for Advent, they're not fluffy and calm readings. They're all about, dark days and ranting at God, apart from the Corinthians, which is a nice in the calm. So the first sentence that I'm focusing on is, why don't you tear apart the heavens and come down? And the second one is from The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, where the Queen says, it must always be winter and never Christmas. And I feel like we've been feeling like this since March, actually, that it just feels like whatever our version of Christmas would be. Or I know that I wrote a thing saying that Lent felt like the lentiest Lent it's ever been. Even after Easter, it still felt like we're in Lent, and it kind of feels like it's still ongoing, and that there's never that hope at the end. And actually, we know there is hope at the end. And how do we share that hope with others? And some of that is being in the waiting time. I reflected, if I've got to wait for something, particularly if it's something like a train, I don't wait very well. I get very anxious, and all I do is I walk around and around and around, and I'm not very much fun to live with, am I, Phil, if I've got something like a train to catch the next day, or even in a week's time. We almost went, before COVID, we were going to go on a ferry in the summer. I was already getting anxious about catching a ferry in February that we'd catch in August. And that tension for me is not good, but that's kind of how I wait. I don't wait calmly. I fill my life with anxiety. And I suppose while we're waiting, it's how can we remove the anxiety and wait with intention and purpose? And having hope helps us to do that. And how we convey hope when it feels like it's always winter and never Christmas. And trying to work out what Christmas means to people so that we can share that actually there is still hope is quite an important thing to do. I have noticed on Facebook there's a real plug for people to start Christmas even earlier this year because it's been so bad. They want to be filled with the Christmas spirit. I don't know when it's going to start. When we lived in Torquay, it started in October anyway, because the turkey and tinsel holidays would start. So the decorations would be up in hotels from half-term October. But there is that. So how do we help people to have hope? And how do we wait with intention? And maybe it's reminding people that God has made a difference in the world and still will and still can, that he has given us those resources. I was really struck, Ruth, with what you said about the agency and pathways. And what Corinthians seems to be saying is you do have the agency and pathways. You are not lacking in any spiritual gift as you wait for the revealing of our Lord Jesus Christ. You can do it. And I suppose for us, it's to say to people, you may feel tired. You may be just thinking, I can't do this again. On Sunday, someone from my church who's a manager in a supermarket said that one of his staff who had to shield through the last lockdown was in floods of tears saying, I can't do that again. I just can't. I can't be locked away in my house on furlough. It's going to destroy me. And I think it's that sense of people going, we can't do this again. That maybe for us it's saying, by the grace of God we can, and that God does break through in all these different ways, and maybe we need to look for those signs of hope that we can then share with others, and that God is at work. So a potter doesn't just throw the clay on and then work it out. It's a slower reveal, isn't it? There's another thing about potter and clay where he just kind of reshapes it all together, but I think this one's much more about you are at work in us and shaping us even when we don't realize it. So I guess that's the last bit of hope in Isaiah that I'd want to share. And that maybe sometimes we need to be the hope in our communities, and that means acting with intention. And it may be to say, life is terrible, but there's still other things. We still need to talk about the environment, about racial justice, about places in the world where life is even darker than it is now. And it's not just about woe is us, but let's see what we can do to be active to restore the whole world.
I wonder if there's a place somewhere. I'm not really sure I've got the complete answer to this. I know I've preached on it, but I've forgotten what I said. In talking a little bit about what hope is and whether there is a difference between hope and optimism, say. Sometimes you hear government ministers just saying everything will be fine by Christmas, and you think that's not hope. That's not giving us hope. That's giving us, and we often put the word blind in front of optimism. Sometimes people put blind in front of hope, don't they? Blind hope. So there must be, I think, hope has to have a foundation, doesn't it? Whereas optimism doesn't. Optimism is just your glass half full person, isn't it? For no apparent reason. It's just, that's how I am. I'm just a happy, optimistic person. It's not the same as hope. So I wonder if there's mileage, just teasing that out and not assuming that everybody knows what you mean when you talk about Christian hope.
There's the story from Vietnam, and I've been looking it up this week because I might use it in the next Synod e-news. So people from the Southwestern Synod, look away now because you've heard this already probably. But there's in the Vietnamese War, there were tens of thousands of US troops captured and made prisoners of war. Some of them were prisoners of war longer than the whole length of the Second World War, 6-7 years, I think some even more than that. But only, hang on, I've got the figure, 591 actually returned to the United States. That's a thousand, several thousand. And they asked Commander James Stockdale, I say that so that you can Google it if you want to read the whole thing. But what was the difference? Those 591 who returned, was there a kind of psychological difference, or was it about fitness or whatever? And he said, and I think he himself was one of the returning troops, and said it was nothing to do with fitness, and it was all to do with your state of mind, and that the optimists died because the optimists said, oh, we'll be home by Christmas, or well, maybe it'll be Easter, or well, maybe it'll be next Christmas, and just constantly went up and down on a kind of a roller coaster, and eventually just lost the will to live. And he said, died of broken hearts. But the people who were more, well, I mean, depends which article you read, pessimistic or realistic, but they said, well, we could be here for a very long time, and this is awful being here, and we've got to somehow find a way of living with it. And yes, we hope we'll be released eventually, but we're not going to pin our futures on that. We're going to pin our future on just making the best of the next day and the next week, and kind of digging in and getting on with it. And when I read the Isaiah, it made me think of that. That Isaiah is not at all a kind of a, everything's going to be fine. It's very much a, this is awful. Yes, they are back from the exile, but it's obviously tough, really tough going, and they're struggling to emerge into a new normal, just to use some random phrases. And so that sense of a hope that isn't blind optimism or false optimism, but is a hope that's based on a kind of a looking at the way and not shying away from it is really bad, and yet we do have a hope. That God is somehow already at work in it. God will do things. We know that in the past, God has acted in surprising ways, and we wait to see what emerges.
Yes, what's going on? Yeah.
I forgot that I'd written down a quote from Martin Luther. Where apparently he was asked, what would you do if the world ended tomorrow? And he said, I would plant a tree today. And I love that sense of, yes, because we can still have hope that there's a purpose in what we do. And actually Phil's really bored of hearing this, but on Sunday we did Forest Church in the school forest. Our school's got forest. And one of the chores we had was to find the little oak saplings that had grown around the oak trees, to dig them up and put them in what's going to be the oak nursery that the school will have for 2 years, until those oak trees are strong enough to survive in the rest of the new town of Cranbrook. And it just felt, I didn't do any of that because I don't do plants, but even just watching people do that, it just felt like such a profound thing to do, that we're doing something for the long term, and it wasn't just a thing for today. And we just had that sense of the timelessness of God as we were doing these things. We were picking up acorns. That's the recklessness of the oak tree, because the oak tree produces all these acorns that don't go anywhere apart from musical instruments at school. And we were doing this job about replanting little saplings that will need a lot of nurture. And there was such a lot of hope in that. And maybe it is also about finding those things that we don't know what the end, we won't be here to see the end of it, but we can be part of the journey. And maybe that's part of intentional hope.
That's really cool. That's really cool. And I'll never tire of hearing of it. Tell me as often as you like. Wow, there's tons of stuff to preach this week. Tons of stuff. So that's really cool. Of course, preaching happens in a much wider context of worship, and these readings can feed into our preaching, whether we do it as like one-off sermon or as little nuggets or separated bits. It doesn't really matter, but they can also feed other things. So I don't know if folk have come up with stuff they might be doing. It might be on Zoom, might be in a building. We might even not know yet. So I suppose we have to prepare for either. Ruth, have you come up with anything?
Yeah, I kind of I can't remember where I am. Also, some things are a bit uncertain, so I have some dates in my diary to go to places, and they may not be open yet, or it might be Zoom or whatever. So, but I thought what I'd really like to do is, if I'm in a building, or somehow, even if we're on Zoom, give people something that they can kind of carry with them through Advent that will be somehow a symbol of hope. And I found, let's see if I can share screen. Yep, there we go. Now, I found this story. Hold on to your, well, probably a breakfast, really, because I'm going to adapt it. But here's the story, Candle of Hope. And it says, 4 candles slowly burnt. I'll leave you some of you can read for yourself some of the slightly more mushy stuff. But the first candle said, I'm peace. The world is so full of anger and fighting, no one can keep me alight, and it went out. The second candle said, I'm faith. I'm no longer indispensable. It doesn't make any sense that I stay awake one moment longer, and it went out. And the third candle began to speak, I'm love. People don't understand my importance, so they put me aside. They even forget to love those nearest to them, and it went out. It's a good story, isn't it? It's really, Isaiah would have loved this one, I feel. A child entered the room where the candles were, saw that 3 of the candles were unlit. Why are you not burning? You're supposed to stay alight. And the child began to cry. The 4th candle said, don't be afraid, I'm hope. And while I'm burning, we can relight the other candles. The child took the candle of hope and lit the other candles. And then it says a slightly dodgy bit, the greatest of these is love, but the flame of hope should never go out from your life. With hope, each of us can have a life with peace, faith, and love. I did say it was a little bit icky. But but I quite like the idea that hope can be what reignites the other. And I thought, well, actually, rather than the candle of hope, because first of all, I was thinking maybe people could have a candle and label it hope and write on it what they think hope is. You could do that. But then I thought maybe a box of matches, because with a box of matches, you can relight wherever a candle needs lighting. And you don't have to worry so much about keeping the light alive. It feels, hope is more like a box of matches, because it's kind of there, but you're not always sure till you need it that it's going to work. And the idea that you kind of have hope that when you strike the match, it will light, and then with that you can reignite the other candles. So I'd really like to do that, and again have people kind of label their matchbox hope and write on what they think hope is, and then it's something you can carry around more than you can a candle. Carry around with you, and think about, how could you do this? You could then, if you visit other people, you could also take a candle, or you could ask them if they've got a candle. You could light their candle. You could talk to them about what hope is. You could leave them with the light of faith or peace or love or whatever it is that they need. So that was my little idea for a thing for people to keep thinking about hope all through Advent.
Cool. What was that TV program about, the sort of, I know there's been a few, that the tortured priest in a poor area of Britain who would go and visit people, and the first thing he always did was he'd light the candle to remind us that Jesus is here or something.
Christ is in this place.
Sean Bean.
It was Sean Bean, yes.
Was it
That well-known priest.
was it called Broken?
Yeah,
It was.
Broken.
I think it was.
People, I'm sure, can find it somewhere. It was a fabulous series, and he was a very good priest, even if he isn't, of course. He played a marvellous priest.
But he always had a box of matches in his pocket, so wherever he was, he could light a candle, and whatever it could be any meeting at all, in someone's house, in the church, wherever. He'd always start by just lighting a candle and saying, "Let's remind us." Did someone have the phrase that he actually said? I can't remember.
I think it was to remind us that the light of Christ is in this place.
Yeah.
That's how I remember it.
Cool. Rachel, what have you come up with?
I like the idea of the matches very much, particularly as I'm sure we've all been in that position where you've got to light the Advent candles or the baptismal candle, and you're kind of there and you're sort of striking away and nothing's happening, and you've always got that sort of tension. Is it going to work this time? So yeah, I do like the matches idea. I was thinking that this Advent I might like to focus on some of the Advent carols that we never sing, and particularly as we're probably not going to be singing. I thought I haven't kind of made any progress in this direction, but I thought I would dig out some Advent carols that have been long forgotten, and maybe get, if there's an arrangement for people to listen to them, but write some kind of reflections on the Advent carols. That was going to be my plan.
So I saw something the other day on the O antiphons. O come, Emmanuel. There's a few of those around, but quite a lot of them could do with putting in more modern idioms and modern metaphors and modern language, I think. So yeah, it's definitely managing that, I think. Neil, what have you come up with?
I think, like all of you, I've been thinking, how can we do something that kind of lingers with us through Advent, and that kind of will work wherever we end up being. And so I actually got very excited about fridge doors, because I don't know what your fridge door is like, but our fridge door, well, exactly. Our fridge door is kind of a window into the working life of our home, because stuck on it with magnets are little bits of paper, things that you're meant to have done, bills that one day it might be nice to pay, whatever. And so one of the things I've been playing with a little bit is, well, what if as congregations we found things could be quotations from scripture, but they could be, as we've already done this morning, we could find quotations from other people, images. Obviously, we would do all of this carefully so that we were correct about copyright. Prayers that we write, meditations, but find a way to generate them so that you could, print maybe 6 or 8 on a sheet of A4 and then cut them up so that you could put a different one on the fridge door each day of Advent.
I like
Now,
that fridge.
The other thing about it is, of course, I know that certainly that also then raises all sorts of issues about using resources. So they could also be PDF, so that actually you could have them on a screen. And if you wanted to, if you switched on your computer or your phone or whatever, they could just pop up as something each day. So I haven't got much further than thinking about that, but that's an idea.
Similar thought I've been having is there is a website where you can make a digital advent calendar, and you can stick in that pictures, text, or videos and stuff. I think if you do a personal one, it's free. If you do a business one, you have to pay. So there's a way around that. I don't know. People can decide for themselves. But I was thinking about this yesterday. What would you put behind the windows if you got people to virtual? But I do like having a physical one on the fridge, though. There's all sorts of mileage in what you could stick on a fridge, as long as you've got rid of all the other clutter off your fridge. Yeah, sorry, Lythan, you were going to say.
I'm just going to share screen because I was going to mention this for the 4th week. So let's see, I've got to find. Oh, there we go.
Someone's been planning ahead.
It's this one, so it's My Advent. And so you can
That's the one I was talking about, yeah.
Press number 5, there's a picture. Or if you're really lucky, you get the minions singing. There you go. So yeah, so I thought that was quite a good idea about.
I wonder if that maybe just working it together. Do we have to all do a separate one? Because I didn't know you were thinking about that. I mean, we could do a good one that lots of people used, couldn't we? Or do a specific one for your locality. I suppose that would work.
Yeah.
There's a new Facebook group that I discovered called Church Christmas and COVID.
Yeah.
And that has lots of different ideas like that about what to do for Advent, because I think probably we do need to I need to think of something to do for Advent more than I would normally, because we're all in our houses, and just to help us not just count down, but kind of be Adventurous. To be Adventy.
That's great. You've invented a new word.
Rather than just think about Christmas. It is a countdown to Christmas, but it's actually about being present in this time as well, I think.
Cool.
I'm trying to say.
So yeah, so I like the fridge. So I wouldn't want to move away from having something physical on the fridge. So I think that's really cool. You could do all sorts on there, couldn't you? You could do like a nativity scene on the fridge, or you could do a stick-on advent calendar on the fridge where you had how many 28, I don't know how many days of an advent calendar normally, I don't know, 24. I don't know, so there's lots of mileage in that. That's very cool. What did I come with? Oh yes, Mark, his symbol of hope is the fig tree, isn't it? And the leaves unfurling. I was attached to a church some time ago where they found it difficult to see a future and to see hope. Not that all their issues have now gone away, far from it. But one of the things that we did fairly early on, I did a couple of things that didn't work, but this one that did work, we took this image of the fig tree and we planted a fig tree. We weren't actually using this particular Bible passage. We were using the Bible passage where Jesus said, "I'll just give it another year and put some manure around it," which I think is quite good. Maybe that's what Advent is for. It's for spreading manure. To give it another year. Wait a bit longer, because you're not going to see growth if you put a bare root fig tree in. It's not going to be any leaves on it when you plant it, and probably not until the spring. But this Mark passage says, wait, and when you see the leaves beginning to unfurl, then you know the time is at hand. So maybe you could actually do that. Order a bare root fig tree if you're meeting in a physical place and plant it. Do it in a pot though, because fig trees take over the world if you don't put them in a pot. And that could be quite a sort of like a visual outside thing to have for passers-by, as well as just inside the church. That's what I thought. The other little thing I thought of was thinking about prayers, and I thought the Isaiah 64 words could easily fit quite nicely into prayers of intercession. So maybe, those prayers of intercession you have where you have like a shopping list of categories of people you're praying for, which sometimes the bane of our lives, but sometimes it works. And I quite like it sometimes when it works with scripture. So I thought maybe you could have a repeated introduction to the different stanzas of the prayer that might go, "Tear open the heavens, Lord, and come gently into the lives of," fill the dots. I quite like repeated patterns and lines in prayers, and that seems to lend itself quite easily to do that. Whether you can tear open the heavens and come gently, I'm not sure it's a contradiction or not. Although if Rachel's right and God's a baby and not Iron Man, then God's going to say, I can't get past the stair gate, can I? So I'm not coming down. I'm trapped.
Anyway, Phil, before
yes.
you go on with that metaphor that
that's wise.
I was going to introduce a prayer idea similar to that, but more robust probably. And it's something I've used before, but it was the idea of Roddy Hamilton, not mine, which is to use current newspaper items that you want. I've gone, haven't I? Have I gone?
You're back.
You're back.
Right. So newspaper items or whatever for prayer, and then you have a newspaper and you say, "Oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down and tear the paper," and then kind of say, like I said at the beginning, but you have, Prince of Peace, you have them, so that we are kind of talking about the world ripped apart, but then trying to bring it back together again, but not the same. Do you have more ideas, Phil, or do you want me to carry on waffling?
Well, that sounds more robust. If you've got any more robust things to say, then crack on.
Well, the other idea that I've nicked from someone else, from Caroline Brown, was to have photographs of hope that people have seen, and whether you want to gather them before the Sunday or whether you want to send them out to do that, might be a good idea to say, where do you see signs of hope where you are? Or if you're in a building, you put on the wall a fig tree and people write on the leaves, but I prefer the visual.
Just going back to your newspaper, sorry, my head was just going, there's the it's the Iona song, isn't it, about the cloth for the cradle? But I just thought you could put your torn up newspaper in your manger, if you had a big manger, or a life-sizey sort of manger, waiting for the baby for Christmas, and you could put that in there, so that then it's kind of bringing together that, the solution to the prayers is going to be that the baby will come to the manger. But might be a bit too arty.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. There's some ideas there. I think that's pretty much sorted then, isn't it? Like the first Sunday. What about what everybody's going to be doing on the first Sunday of Advent is lighting the Advent candles. That's the one thing that unites us all. is we have to find a way, and then we have to argue about what words we use and what we call the candles, whether it's peace, joy, hope, and love, or whether it's Matthew, Mark, Mungo, and Midge, or whoever the one of them is Mary, isn't it, as well? And whether one's a blue one and one's a pink one, or whatever. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Has anyone thought through how we do the lighting of the candles, or the words of the candles, or do it on Zoom? What has anyone got ideas about Advent candles?
I mean, I think. Sorry, go Ruth.
Well, only that at Taunton on Zoom, we did one week. We lit candles for our intercession, and then people held their candles kind of up at the screen. You know, as they prayed, they said who the candle was for, and it was rather lovely to watch the screen be filled with different sorts of candles. That isn't a candle; it's my phone.
It's gone out, Ruth. It's gone out.
I couldn't just conjure up a candle.
Obviously.
You need your matches of hope.
Yes.
Go on, Neil. What were you going to say?
I mean, it might be nice to do something that we've done, I think, in different ways through the crisis, which is there have been times when we have been invited, not least by the government, to light a candle and put it in the window. And so one thing it might be nice to do would be to invite church families to put, you know, one candle in the window for the first Sunday, then two for the second, and so on. Maybe even to invite people to say, well, you know, could we light them for a few hours each night? And, you know, that's not going to be possible for everyone, but it might be an interesting way of talking about, you know, connecting it to what we've been talking about, which is this thing of, you know, what does it mean to live expectantly in a way that makes a difference? And, you know, I mean, I'm not for a second pretending that walking past the house with a candle burning in it changes the world, but it would be, you know, in a little community, or if there are a number of folk around, might even be something ecumenical that would begin, you know, that lovely image of light spreading.
Working out ecumenically locally might be a very creative thing to do, a bit like they do with that Holy Week poster, because the more you see them, the more you notice them, don't you? And so if you go down a house, it's got 8 Holy Week posters in, you notice that. If you go past a house and there's just one of them, you perhaps don't notice it. Why do I keep seeing these Holy Week posters? Because all the Christians in town have got them in the window. That's quite creative, as long as you don't burn down the whole terrace.
Well, as I say, you could do that if you wanted to avoid naked flames. You could do that with a poster that had 4 candles, and then you could unfold it so that you get more candles appearing on the poster week by week, and then have a little flappy down bit that says Christ is here.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's a design job for some design person. That's right, to Andy Jackson.
Only we knew somebody who.
Well, and it would echo people putting rainbows on their windows, or Black Lives Matter, or support the NHS. I mean, it would be a way, it would speak into some of our, because I mean, I think one of the things we've done in our communities is we've spoken to each other, not least through what we have displayed in our windows.
If we did it ecumenically, one of the candles would have to be pink, so I can see it all falling apart. You know,
well, that's because you're not an optimist.
You could always, if you did them in black and white, so people can say colour in the flame, they can also choose to colour in one of their candles pink, should they feel that that's important.
Brilliant.
Sorted.
Third day of Advent, by the way, pink candle.
Yeah.
Why?
Okay.
Because it's the refreshment Sunday. It's Gaudete Sunday, which is kind of a holiday in the fast of Advent. But some people think, therefore, because it's pink, it's about Mary. But it's more about there being a kind of a pause, a little bit of a holiday in the middle. So you have
holiday from Advent.
Sunday.
We don't have to hope anymore. We're on holiday.
Well, that's because in some places, so in Eastern European countries still, Orthodox countries probably, the tradition is that you fast in Advent as you do in Lent. So it would make sense to have the break halfway through, or almost to go, actually, today you can have some meat.
Right, I think we've perhaps drained the swamp of ideas and even some robust ones. Yeah, thank you for listening in. I hope that some of what we've said has inspired something for you as you prepare, and bless you as you do this vital work of bringing God's word through worship into people's lives. Amen.
Amen.